Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Huddlin' with the Pros, Sports Talk Radio. I'm David Weinstein, Huddlin' with the Pros legal analyst. I'm a former state and federal prosecutor, currently practicing criminal defense in Miami, Florida with Clark Silverglade. Joining me tonight is my co-host, Bill Gutman, Huddlin' with the Pros sports columnist and author of the Mike Fargo Mystery Series. We'll be starting our discussion in just a minute. Tonight we'll be joined during our Hot Topic segment by New York Times sports columnist Ken Belson. We will be talking about gambling, fantasy sports, and the overall hypocrisy of the major leagues. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about our show. Huddlin' with the Pros Sports Talk Radio airs live every Wednesday evening from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern. The goal of our show is to take on all the important and controversial sports issues head-on. We'd love to hear from you, so post your questions on our Twitter and Facebook pages at hashtag AskHWTPSports, or email us at feedback@hwtpsportstalk.com. We're also on Instagram at HuddlinWThePros. Ken is currently at the NFL meetings at league headquarters in New York City. He covers the NFL for the New York Times, a job that includes writing about teams, stadiums, medical issues, lawsuits, and many other elements of the country's biggest and most popular sports. He joined the New York Times sports section in 2009 after spending 3 years in their Metro sections. He's also done some extensive work in their Tokyo bureau, is the author of a book about Believe It or Not of All Things, Hello Kitty, and is a Mets fan, so he's got something to look forward to, unlike the other Yankees fans. Ken, thanks for joining us. We're talking tonight about the deadly sins of sports, and one of the biggest ones that's come to the forefront this week is gambling and the hypocrisy of the leagues with FanDuel and DraftKings.
Yep. No, it was almost inevitable that it would come to this. The daily fantasy sites have grown so fast and so prominently with the backing of the leagues that sooner or later there was going to be a scandal of some sort that would capture kind of national attention and give, in this case, politicians a reason and lawmakers a reason to look at them more closely.
Well, Ken, you've been looking at it from the inside, and I know fantasy sports is something that started off, a decade ago, where people would have to look in the newspaper, and after all the games were played, the commissioner had to tally the scores, and people were maybe putting a little bit of money down and playing for fun and for pride, not necessarily for the big bucks. Do you think that because of the Major League's oppositions to legitimize sports betting that they tried to craft this other way, and that's why it's become so huge?
No, I don't think it's necessarily responsible to them. I think it's sort of the unintended consequences of something the leagues did push for, which was an exemption of regular season-long fantasy ball from the ban on online gambling. That was in 2006, and at the time, of course, daily fantasy didn't really exist in the current form, but the leagues were all behind regular fantasy, because it kept fans engaged in games that they otherwise might not care about. I mean, pick your analogy. You got a Cleveland tight end, and the team is 7 or heading to a 7-win season, and you're still paying attention to the Cleveland game. Well, that's fantasy football for you. But the daily fantasy version is much different, and it was unanticipated back in 2006. And if you look at the platforms that FanDuel and DraftKings use, they're very much like the online poker platforms that essentially got banned a few years back. It's essentially the migration of what was once legalized gambling, then made illegal, and turned into this. not a heck of a lot different in that sense. And so I think the leagues didn't necessarily bargain for that or anticipate that. But once they saw how popular it was and, in a sense, how addictive it is, they got in behind it by investing in these leagues.
Bill, you and I both talk a lot about hypocrisy, but I know, for starters, the ads are grating on you, and you find a lot of hypocrisy within the stance of the major leagues' take on this. I'm sure you've got a couple of questions you want to ask Ken about that.
Yeah. Hi, Ken. How are you?
Hey. Good.
Yeah, they've just flooded the airwaves with these ads, and they make it sound like you can't lose. Pick your teams, pick your players, pick up your cash, just like that. And they're spending a huge amount of money on the ads. Are they marketing this to young people, or we know the NFL has been built so much on gambling, and gambling is so pervasive in the NFL. Is this going to get more young people into gambling because they feel that they know sports so well and you can't lose by going into these two things? Is there a method to their madness with all these ads?
Well, think back 15 years ago when the Yahoos of the world were all about getting eyeballs and profits be damned. Back then it was all about let's get enough traffic on our websites and the profits will eventually show up. This is something of the same strategy. To your point about who the audience is, I think you're absolutely right. It's the target football fan. And if you look at the actors or real people in these ads, they all look like college kids, basically. They all have hoodies. They all seem to, have no day jobs except for maybe doing fantasy football. And like you said, it's very, very almost insidious. Pick your team and pick up your cash. I've done stories on gambling addiction, and this fits the motif of trying to get somebody making it sound very easy. Scratch off tickets. You watch the ads for lotteries. There's only happy people in these ads. There's only people winning. There's no downsides to any of it, and that's very dangerous. And I wonder. Roger Goodell was asked about this today at the press conference at the NFL owners meeting, and he talked about consumer protection being important. It's not going to be long before some college kid gets daddy's credit card, blows $100,000 on the credit card. The dad happens to be an enterprise lawyer and sues the websites. And look who they're marketing to. These are people who may not be responsible with their own money. And really, the sad thing, based on the numbers I've seen, is that it's already been dominated by the people who are computer experts. So I don't know if they're fully disclosing what the odds are of winning. At least at a horse track, there's some established odds out there. And I think programs that can play 5,000 lineups at a time and have a computer generate those are the guys that are winning the big checks. The average guy who just fills out a lineup like a Powerball ticket in the deli, I don't think he's going to win a heck of a lot of money that way.
No, and he's probably not. He's the guy who, you see in the ad who won $360. They don't tell you that it cost him $660 to win the $360. I want to remind everybody you're listening to HWTP Sports Talk Radio with me, David Weinstein, and Bill Gutman. We're in the middle of our hot topic discussion with Ken Belson about FanDuel and sports gambling. Ken, do you think that Eric Schneiderman's going to get the answer to some of the questions you just asked? How are you putting the numbers together? What are the algorithms? What's going on? And how can the NFL, with a straight face, turn down the request of or fight against the request of the state of New Jersey to set up legalized sports gambling when Robert Kraft is a major owner in one of these sports fantasy betting sites?
Well, two questions, obviously somewhat separate. The Attorney General from New York State calls. That's a pretty powerful person. You don't want to get in his crosshairs because it's only going to make them angry. Now, whether Schneiderman is just looking to take some headlines, get away with, get some publicity for himself, I don't know. Where's really the money in here? It's these attorney generals are looking for either high-profile people to target a hedge fund manager, a guy with a big dollar amount attached to him, or something that's broad and insidious. This doesn't necessarily fit either of those. It's more in the news, and they're probably trying to not piggyback on it, but perhaps use their weight at a time when the companies are vulnerable. But you don't comply, then you have further wrath. So I think and they, by the way, with both the leagues, not the NFL, but the Major League Baseball and others behind them, and also these big media companies, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars investment. By now, they have good lawyers, so they'll be working either to reach a settlement, or to avoid any major prosecution. That would be my bet. Whether it slows down the juggernaut of people signing up for it is another thing. And the main thing, really, at this point, since they're not turning huge profits, is this going to spook other investors from putting money into these businesses? That's going to be the trick. If it turns into a trickle, then you're not going to see all those ads bombarding you, which, some people might cheer at this point. Your second question about the NFL and New Jersey and the two owners owning parts of these things. It's interesting. Commissioner was asked about it today, and he drew a distinction between fantasy football and influencing the actual game. In other words, he said that if there's people trading on fantasy football, it doesn't influence the actual game being played. He's more concerned with bribes of players, for instance, or players taking a dive, that kind of stuff. That to him is affecting the integrity of the game. If people are betting on a quote-unquote fantasy outcome, that's their own business. It's derivative of the actual product. I don't know. I think it is a conflict. To your point, they're opposed to legalized gambling and sportsbook gambling, but here two owners, Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft, own stakes in these companies. I don't know how you square that. It's a hard one. All they'll say is that the league itself is not invested in them. They don't allow the NFL logo or marks to be used by the DraftKings or others. And yet, you go into practically any stadium now in the league, and there's a DraftKings or FanDuel sign up there. Go down to Jacksonville, there's an entire lounge built, which is essentially advertising for the company. So, it's a tough one. At least, I guess you could argue, the NBA, Commissioner Adam Silver has written an op-ed piece in our paper basically arguing for the legalization of sportsbook gambling. So I guess you could argue that he's not hypocritical in that regard.
Well, I think, Bill, you and I'd give him the award for the least hypocritical on that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely, because it's going to come sooner or later. But it sounds like, the logic of Goodell seems a bit flawed to me, because games for years, going way back to the Black Sox scandal, games are thrown by disgruntled players who are not making a lot of money at all. The college basketball scandals in the 40s was college kids. They needed $1,000. And there was a time in the 40s at Madison Square Garden when they had the basketball doubleheaders that fans would be cheering for the point spread and not for their team to win the game. But I can't see players making millions of dollars or $1 million a year taking a bribe to not play well just to satisfy some gamblers. So you have to wonder about that as well. And I think, too, we should now talk a little bit about what sparked this recent thing, that a mid-level content manager at DraftKings named Ethan Haskell won $350,000 from the other site, FanDuel, and there was a feeling that certain kind of data was released. He had someone inadvertently released data before the start of the third week of games, and it's been called akin to insider trading by a sports gambling lawyer. So this is what sparked the most recent thing, and you wonder if that's going to cause it is causing continued investigation, but the potential for criminal charges and how they can stop this kind of thing.
And Ken, before you get to the answer on that one, I want to sort of piggyback on there to go back to what you were talking about earlier. The sort of tie in insider trading to someone who is with an NFL team, not necessarily a star player or a head coach, but somebody who's got access to who's going to play, who's not going to play, and can give a tip to somebody who's going to go run out and alter their FanDuel lineup.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions in there. I'll try and remember them all if I can. First, the league itself, and we should separate the league from the teams, because there is a both legal and functional distinction, and the league prohibits its employees from playing even regular fantasy football, if you could believe it. So they are trying to remain sort of above the fray. But, it's a collection of 32 owners with 32 profit margins. And, they feel like they can't stop them from trying to operate their businesses. Both Roger Goodell, Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones, and maybe this is too much of a distinction, owned their stakes in these fantasy companies, daily fantasy companies, through other companies. So it's the Kraft Holdings Company. It's not the Patriots itself. And Legends, which is a hospitality company that the Cowboys own, the Yankees owns the stake in the other company. So, I mean, it's not coming out of Jerry Jones's pocket. Of course, it ultimately does profit Jerry Jones. I don't want to get too far afield on that. I think there is you raised a point about players maybe getting larger salaries now and maybe not needing to throw games or look to gambling as a way to make money. But you know what? Players have lost millions of dollars before they've even retired, and they get desperate too, and that's one of the problems. It's a slippery slope, that we're now seeing, and I'm going to go really far afield here, with the issue of domestic violence and automatic penalties. If a player automatically gets 6 games for being accused of hitting his girlfriend or his wife, well, guess what? It's not going to take a mobster or a gambler along to go pay a woman $25,000 to accuse a star player of beating her up in a bar one night. And then suddenly that guy's out, and you're betting against the guy being out, and then there's gambling implied in that too. So it's all over the place. I mean, you can't get around it. And I guess Goodell and the other commissioners have to do as best they can to have a front against this. But there's so many ways in which gambling is integrated into the game, or at least touches the game, I guess.
No, and you're right, and I think it's something that many call a conspiracy theorist to draw up the kind of scenario that you were talking about, but I don't think it's too far afield, and I think you're right. I think that's the danger that's inherent in this, with these kids that are making a little bit too much money and don't know what to do with it, and can find themselves at the wrong end of somebody who's going to try and influence them. What's your take on the amount of revenue that's generated that sort of flows back to the NFL? You made a comment earlier they don't allow FanDuel or DraftKings to use the NFL logo or shield or MLB or NHL for that matter, but yet they're encouraging these people to advertise during the course of their games. As Bill mentioned, they have the sort of plugs right at the start of the baseball games about who the announcers' teams are going to be. And in connection to that, ESPN's made an announcement they're going to cut off the ads now. Do you think that's just lip service?
Yeah, it's they're cutting off the promotions built into the programming, but they're still running the ads, if I understand it right. So, let's face it, that's worth a heck of a lot more than an announcer telling you his picks for the game or for the night. As far as their bottom line, I mean, all those ads that we're seeing on Sundays and all these other days, I mean, that goes to the networks, and that's their prerogative to both take those ads and profit from them. But the signage in the stadium and the sponsorship deals is very real money. I'll give you one example. I can't name the team because it was told to me in confidence, but they get $900,000 a year from FanDuel for a full-on sponsorship in a stadium. Well, okay, that goes straight to the owner's bottom line. Now, he can use that for a salary or whatever he wants, fix up the stadium, and so on. But that's real money. And by the way, that's in a reasonably small market team. So you can imagine it's 2x or 3x in a bigger stadium. So that's a couple $1 million for a single sponsorship is good money. That's not something to sniff at, and you can see why the owners would have lobbied the NFL for that. Just something I heard today, which I did not know, the NFL allowed the teams to sign multi-year sponsorships with these daily fantasy companies, but it's on a one-year sort of probation, if you will. And if the league decides not to renew the 1 year, then those teams have to cut off their sponsorship deals. So they're really only in the first year of this, and it's amazing how quickly it's spread. And the NFL may get spooked by this at the end of this cycle and say, all right, guys, cut them off. On the other hand, the teams may say, wait a second, I'm getting $1 million. I'm not so fast. Let's find a way around this. So the commissioner's having a tiptoe around a lot of business decisions and money talks, I guess. And just as a reference point, back in there was a long prohibition for many years on teams taking money from hard liquor companies.
Right.
You remember back in the 60s and 70s, I used to open up my yearbooks, and there was Jim Beam and Scotch and all that kind of stuff. And then it went away for many years with just say no and don't drive drunk and so forth. Well, guess what? The recession hit in 2008, 2009. Suddenly, they're taking rum ads and vodka ads. When money's needed, the rules get bent.
It's said that both DraftKings and FanDuel are now valued at $1 billion and have hundreds of millions in investments. What are the leagues getting out of this? How much money is MLB and the NFL or the NHL getting from participating to whatever degree in these two sites?
Well, I don't know the value of their sponsorships. They've taken equity stakes, so and they're not large, from what I understand. But I'm sure there's money going to the league's bottom line too. The NFL doesn't have that, although they just did sign a deal with DraftKings, in London for the 3 London games because they have legal gambling there. I don't understand that position. You take it in London where they have legal gambling. You don't take it here but you still call it not gambling. So I don't understand how that to me seems like a blatant contradiction. So I don't understand how the league is able to do that deal. And then I asked about that, and they said, well, but the signage, you can't see it on TV. It's not in the lower bowl, somewhere else. I don't understand what that means either. So they're trying to have it every which way. In a sense, they look a little smarter for being cautious, because they're not in the position that MLB and NHL is right now of having to figure out how on earth these two companies allow their employees to gamble on the other sites. That, to me, is something they didn't either do their due diligence or was never fully explained to them.
And now they've come up with a quick fix where, as a reaction to all of this, now they've put a policy in that you can't bet on the competitor's site. They claim it was always a policy they couldn't bet on their own site, but there was never a prohibition on betting on the competitor's site, which is, exactly what brought them to the forefront. I want to remind everybody once again, you're listening to Huddle with the Pros, Sports Talk Radio with me, David Weinstein, and Bill Gutman. We're in the middle of our discussion with Ken Belson about fantasy sports. Ken, why is it, do you think it's because they're king sport, that the NFL seems to be in the forefront of all this fantasy talk, but yet the dailies that you can make money because there's more games on MLB, on what will become the NHL season and NBA as it comes up, how are they avoiding the heat?
I think partly, as you said, the hockey and basketball are just getting going. But let's face it, the NFL is the biggest league, and so they're always going to take the most heat and the most scrutiny, even though, ironically, they're probably doing the least of the 4 big leagues in terms of partnerships. No, they're just the NFL. It's year-round, and I know because I never seem to get a break from covering them. No matter what they do, they're going to get the most scrutiny. And I could write you 100 hockey stories and never get as much attention as a single Tom Brady story. In fact, if I could write a hockey story with Tom Brady in it, I'd really figure something out. But it's just a case of the NFL getting outsized attention. It's just everything. It doesn't matter. There have been many cases of domestic violence in other leagues, but when the NFL has it, it's a different issue. Some of this is their own, they want to be the biggest. Well, you're going to get the most attention, and that's just the way they roll. There's no other way to explain it that way. The other thing, too, and sort of part of the questions you were asking before, look, gambling's been a part of the NFL since the NFL came around. Some of the teams were started by bookmakers. No surprise there. Guy who owned the Chicago Cardinals owned the racing form and a horse racing track. The Rooney family, the Mara family. This is part of the sport going back to the league, going back to its creation. So, our newspaper even still has betting lines in it. So talk about daily fantasy as a game of skill and not chance and all that. It just seems to me a fiction at the moment.
Yeah, I still can't really seem to wrap my head around it. And again, when they talk about the people who are winning big, I think that when you, well, I wouldn't say you because you're in the middle of this, Ken, but when average people hear about it, they're thinking about one guy who goes out and puts together one team and comes up with the right combination and wins that money. But that's not really the case, is it? It's the people who are doing multiple teams and multiple sites and sort of playing it as a stock market. Isn't that more the situation?
Yeah, that's the way it feels. I mean, look, I don't spend a ton of time on these sites, so I'm not the perfect person to talk about it. But the way it's marketed is very much a lottery, get rich quick approach, and I mean that's how they sold poker. I mean, poker. Who would think you could watch poker on TV, and yet they found a way to sell that too. This seems a little more glib and almost insidious, and I wouldn't be surprised out of a potential settlement with the Attorney General. There's some rules on marketing as well. I know it's probably not going to get as much attention, but it does seem to be something, if somebody's really paying attention and pushing for consumer protections, that would be one area where they'd want to tighten up. You might not want to make it like one of those medical ads where it's 1/3 advertising and 2/3 death trap and warnings, but you could at least have some message about, gamble responsibly or whatever it is, to at least pretend you care that this is simply not a done deal. You're going to potentially lose a lot of money playing this.
Ken, there's five states right now that do not allow this. Is it possible that more states will somehow be able to pass legislation to get them out of the state and not allow it to be done in the state, or is this the 5 states just an aberration that's not going to change?
Yeah, the states I looked at is Washington, Arizona, among them.
Iowa.
Yeah, Iowa. I wondered, I believe those states, particularly Arizona, have heavy lobbying from the Indian casinos, and I believe that's partly responsible for why those states are exempted or have exempted themselves. But, there are Indian casinos all over the place, and it may be that they're just stronger or got to it quicker than others. I think that may be why it is. I don't know whether it's enough of an issue for a legislator or legislature to take it on. It seems like a bit of a niche at the moment. I mean, it's I think people are still getting their heads around, number one, what it is, and number two, why they might not like it. And interesting, you have states like New Jersey, which are kind of pushing reverse, right? I mean, they're basically saying this is gambling. Why don't we just give up this ruse and have sports gambling altogether and stop with this, and regulate it, of course. But and so you have states going the other direction as well. I mean, they're using fantasy football or daily fantasy as a way to just go for sports gambling overall.
And Ken, do you think it might be some pressure that's going to have to come down from Washington to really get everybody's attention here if they try and tie it into the antitrust exemption, if they try to draw in some other favors that they've been giving to the leagues? I know this year we have no blackout rule, so that was something that came down from D.C. To get regulation here and get some consumer protection, because as you pointed out, at the state level, the investigation that's taking place in New York is centered around, we've got a hot topic and a hot ticket here. We can collect some money in a fine. Your business is taking place here. We can collect a decent chunk of change from a $1 million industry. But do you think it's going to take some sort of action from Washington before we see any consumer protection?
My hunch, and I haven't thought deeply about this, but my hunch is no, and that's primarily because the House is controlled by the Republicans. Well, House and Senate are controlled by the Republicans. It's not going to stop somebody from calling hearings because they know they get good ratings on C-SPAN. But I don't think, I'd be hard-pressed to think that they would put in heavy-duty protections. The blackout rule was a bit of an anomaly in that the FCC, which has 5 commissioners, 3 of them are Democratic, and the leader of the 3 was pushing this issue particularly hard, and so that's a commission that's sort of its own little quirkiness. I don't see the legislature taking it up. I mean, unless there's they got many bigger issues, and we're going into a presidential election cycle. But and the Republicans in general are just not going to try and add. That's just not their motif. And there's plenty. If you look at the committees that would look at the NFL, the Commerce Committee is one because there's interstate. That's run by Fred Upton, who I believe I hope I'm getting this right. Fred Upton, who is from his district includes Arlington, Texas. So something tells me he's a bit of a football fan. So you go committee by committee, you have to kind of map it out a little bit, and doesn't seem to me there's going to be a heck of a lot of momentum there. Look at the Washington football name. There were 50 senators who opposed it, and they were all Democrats. I mean, not a single Republican signed on to it. So that gives you a little bit of sense of what the appetite is for trying to legislate pro sports.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question that really goes back to sports itself. I've been a sports fan for over 50 years or more, and it's kind of the game on the field or on the court or on the ice that I'm interested in. That's what I want to see. We've talked about how baseball stadiums today are like amusement parks, and you look in the stands and people are looking into their cell phones and texting, and they got food that they're juggling with each hand, and no one watches the games, or very few people, whereas when we were kids at these old ballparks, you riveted on the players. Do you think that all this gambling and now with this is going to change not necessarily the purity of the sport on the field, but the interest of fans? Are they going to games more interested in winning bets and winning on their fantasy sites than really enjoying the games as games and getting into the sport for what it is or what it was designed to be? Is that going to change, or has it changed? I think it has, and you just wonder where it'll go.
Yeah, I think it. Let me speak specifically about football for the moment. I think it already has, and I say football because fantasy football is far larger than fantasy baseball and fantasy basketball for that matter. So, and I think as you go around the stands, the whole push for all the teams now have been required to amp up their stadium cell signals and add Wi-Fi, so people can check their cell phones because supposedly that's what they want, and you don't want them. The big tagline was we wanted to recreate the living room in the stadium. Well, the living room is me sitting around drinking a beer and putting my feet up and with a cell phone in one hand and a TV in the other. So, and I did a story back in 2013. The Jacksonville Jaguars had a fantasy lounge they built. I mean, they were not just acknowledging it, but selling it as a perk for coming to the stadium. Show up to the stadium. It's hot out. We have a nice air-conditioned lounge with expensive beer and food, and we have TVs with every other game on. And by the way, we have tablet computers free for you to use, so you can log on to your scores, your fantasy, track your fantasy teams. And, incidentally, the Jacksonville Jaguars are playing about 100 yards down there. And by the way, the game I went to, they lost terribly, so most people were happy to be inside watching something else. But, they gave over to this notion that you're there simply to watch a football game. With that idea, just, shot that to heck. It was not about that. And, look, they acknowledge that that's what fans seem to want now. Let's give them what they want. So I think that train kind of left a while ago. And you see it in baseball too. And I go to a lot of games. And I years ago, you used to go and you would talk to your friend between innings, right? Because you would be sitting and watching the game during the game as it was being played. Now they have so many advertisements and T-shirt launches and kiss cams and get up and dance and do these things between innings. The only time to talk to your friend is when the game is actually being played. There's no more quiet time. There's no more downtime. That's why it's such a pleasure to go to Wrigley, because they still have a little bit of sort of normalcy about it. But that's that trend's been going on for years. It disturbs me only because I grew up, when there wasn't all that music playing. But like I said, it's bigger than both of us or all of us, and it's not going to change, I'm afraid.
No.
No. Well, Ken, that time really flew by quickly. We can't thank you enough for calling in, especially taking time out from covering the NFL at the league meeting there. Anything you want to plug besides the times and your Twitter handle before we end the show here?
I won't explain the meaning, but at L Belson, EL_Belson. It has to do with a Guatemalan race walker. Someday I'll tell you about it. And anytime you have a question about Hello Kitty, feel free to bring me back on the show.
Oh, thanks, Ken. I'll be sure that our fans will be clamoring to do that. I want to remind everybody, Huddling with the Pros, Sports Talk Radio, airs live every Wednesday evening from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern. The show is produced by Jacqueline Park and is a Hyacinth Communications production. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Thanks to our guest, Ken Belson, and to our great Huddling with the Pros team, Bill Gutman, Danina DePool, and our digital editor, Thomas Zhou. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you next week.